Last spring, I spent 6 weeks building something I was certain would work. It didn't, and the specific way it failed taught me more about where AI income actually comes from than any success would have. Here is exactly what happened, what broke, and the 3 things they do differently. Things that had instituted real, documented results. I want to start with the setup, because the details matter. I had identified what looked like a clean opportunity. Small professional service firms, accountants, insurance brokers, small law practices were drowning in client-facing documents. Engagement letters, onboarding questionnaires, summary reports, the kind of repetitive writing that eats 4 to 6 hours a week of a professional's time. I thought that on paper, this was a reasonable thesis. The pain was real. The technology existed. The price point was defensible. I had done enough reading to feel confident. What I had not done was talk to an actual buyer before building anything. I spent the first 2 weeks building a workflow in a no-code automation tool. I connected it to a document generation layer, wrote a set of prompt templates, built a simple intake form, and tested it across 4 or 5 different document types. It worked, not perfectly, but well enough that I believed in it. Week 3, I reached out to 12 small professional firms, people I either knew or could reach through one degree of separation. I sent a short, plain text message describing the problem I believed they had and what I was offering. The response rate was decent. 7 people replied. 6 agreed to a short call. The calls were where the thesis began to crack. The first sign was how the conversations kept drifting. I would describe the document problem, the hours lost to repetitive writing, and they would nod or type something agreeable and then pivot. What about client intake? Could it connect to our billing system? We actually need help with our proposal process more than our reports. The problem is the second sign was harder to see in the moment. Every single conversation that touched on pricing hit the same wall. Not the number itself. I had expected some negotiation, but the category. When I said setup fee, something close, these were people who thought in monthly retainers, in ongoing relationships, in vendors they could call. A one-time setup from someone they had just met, for a system built on tools they had never heard of, to automate a process that was annoying but not existential. That was not a purchase they knew how to make. I had built a product that matched no mental model they already had for buying. By week 5, I had one interested party, no signed agreements, and a workflow that technically functioned and practically sat and used. I ran a direct post-mortem, not a feelings exercise, a documented one. I wrote down every assumption I had made before building, then marked each one as confirmed, partially confirmed, or wrong. Of 9 assumptions, 3 were confirmed, 2 were partially confirmed, and 4 were wrong. The 4 wrong ones were all on the demand side. I had assumed the problem was felt urgently. I had assumed buyers could see the ROI quickly. I had assumed a one-time fee was a natural fit. I had assumed that solving the technical problem was the hard part. None of those were true. But here is what nobody tells you about a clean failure. The data from a failure is more specific than the data from a muddled success. When something works, you often don't know which part of it worked. When something fails in a documented, structured way, you know exactly which assumption broke, and that knowledge is transferable. Here is what I changed, in concrete terms. First, I stopped building before talking. The new rule, which I borrowed from people who have been doing productized services for years and which I had arrogantly skipped, is that you sell before you build. You describe the outcome you're offering to at least 5 potential buyers, you name a price, and you watch what happens. If no one moves, you have saved yourself weeks of work. If someone says yes, you build it knowing you had a real buyer. I would have found out in week 1 what I discovered in week 4. Second, I started listening for urgency, not just agreement. People are polite. They will tell you your idea sounds interesting. They will agree the problem is real. They will say that could be useful. None of that is signal. Signal is someone saying, we need to solve this before Q2, or pulling out their calendar unprompted, or asking what it would take to start. Urgency is rare, which is exactly why it's worth listening for. Third, I repositioned what I was selling to match how my target buyers already spent money. These firms had existing software subscriptions and existing contract relationships. They did not have a budget line for one-time AI setup projects. When I recommend a version of the service as a monthly retainer, ongoing documents the not build monthly cancel all time. The category resumed dropped immediately. The price was lower, but the conversion was real. One client signed within 2 weeks of the reframe. That engagement has now run for 4 months. I want to be honest about what the failed experiment cost. Roughly 40 hours of work over 6 weeks, some goodwill in a few professional relationships where I followed up too many times, and the particular sting of having been certain. That last one is not nothing. There is a specific kind of embarrassment in believing your own thesis too early, and it is worth naming, because the lesson it teaches, check your assumptions against reality as cheaply and as early as possible, is the one that actually sticks. If you are in the middle of building something right now, or thinking about it, here is the one thing you can do today. Write down every assumption your idea depends on. Not the idea itself, the assumptions underneath it. Who feels this pain? How urgently? How do they currently spend money to solve adjacent problems? What would make them say yes this month rather than maybe later? Put them on paper. Mark each one as either confirmed by real evidence or assumed. If most of your list is assumed, you are where I was in week 2. That is not a reason to stop. It is a reason to go get evidence before you go further. The experiment that didn't work is not the story I planned to tell when I started this channel, but it might be the most useful one I can offer, because it shows exactly where the gap lies between a clean idea and an actual income stream. That gap is almost never the technology. It's almost always the assumption you are most confident about. The thing that gets you is not ignorance. It is certainty that arrived before the evidence did.